the Life Process Program LPP podcast. My name is Zach Rhoads, and I'm here with the creator of the LPP, Dr. Stanton Peele. Stanton, it is good to be with you.
Pleasure as always.
We field questions about addiction and what addiction means, and we have an online service. It's a coaching program that where we help people sort out their life problems. We don't see addiction as a disease, and as such, we have people who ask us questions. And one of the questions that has been coming up a lot recently, you've seen, I've emailed you various questions that are around this zone, or something like this. I'm going to kind of meld two examples together. So in this situation, there's a person with an elderly family member. Now, this person who has come to me, let's call him James. James has come to me and said, my elderly mother is drinking a lot and is drinking into destruction. And one reason that we all know in the family that she's drinking is because she has health ailments and she sees maybe the end is near, and that's depressing. And now James wants to love his mother and wants to endear and be endearing to his mother at the same time as he wants to create healthy boundaries. And then also there's a place that he believes exists where perhaps his mother could improve. And she's late in life, but maybe she could improve as long as she wants to. So this person's having difficulty figuring out, A, how do I make sure I set boundaries, but not make this person recoil? I'm not going to say, hey, you're drinking too much, it's such a problem, because that whole ball of wax is so hard to hear and contend with and respond to. He doesn't want to isolate the person. He wants to know, what's a good way to help my family members kind of center on this issue in a way that we can agree on, and that's still loving to our parent, but we all take care of ourselves. And he wants to know, I don't want to be complacent and I do want to be loving. What's a good balance? And I think the most fundamental question that I couldn't really answer was, okay, I don't like Al-Anon, I don't like 12 steps, I don't like things like that. But it looks like when I go down the rabbit hole of asking these questions, that's the only thing that's available. Now, I don't want to go, he's saying, I don't want to go to a place just because it's available. Any old place could be available and it's not good, but what resources are there for actually asking these questions and getting answers and getting community support? So that's the situation this time, and we've had a few questions like that recently.
Um, is your guess that if he took the woman he describes and suggested that she go to Al-Anon, that she'd be very receptive to that?
No. I
I,
mean, Al-Anon being the like four family members, the person that he's describing is his mother. And so no,
right.
he's not his mother's not going to go and seek.
So he would have to. Oh, good point. I get my 12-step groups mixed up. She's not a good candidate for AA herself.
Right. That's not going to happen. I think
That's not going to happen.
he's
All
come to
right.
grips with that. Yeah.
And Al-Anon, their kind of basic message often for a spouse is hands off. It's not your problem. Maybe set some boundaries, but and I think I can from the start say you and I come from a let's deal with it in a naturalistic situation, which is sort of what he's doing. He's sort of asking you, well, help me think about how to deal with this, me and my mother and the rest of the family and my mother. So we're in our bailiwick, but it's a sticky bailiwick because um, you get a lot of questions like that, especially with an older person. A person always has a life,
Hmm.
and you might be dealing with a kid or a spouse, and you're, you know, they're not going to change because you just say something. Um, And would you agree, or I'm going to throw it back to you in 1 second. Your professional life, in a lot of your professional life, you deal with children or adolescents who got some kind of school related problem, and you become engaged in that with that student, and that inextricably, inevitably involves you with the family. That usually means the parents, might be some siblings. And so an awful lot of your thinking is about how do I deal with a person in a family to get the family to be helpful for that person. Although, do you think it's a totally different picture if you're talking about a 14-year-old or a 16-year-old versus a 67-year-old? Do you feel it's a different story or it's a similar paradigm?
There can be similarities, and the difference is stages of life, of course. So in this case, we're talking about someone who is at an end stage of life. With kids, there's usually something I could be convincing about is that there's hope and growing and more developing and a bright future, perhaps, for a person. Um, with with somebody in this stage of life, I suppose the frame is more living in the here and now in the best way we can. Not that there isn't that with kids, but if I were to make parallels, it would have to be in that frame.
So you have a pretty hard time holding out some pot of gold at the end of the rainbow where you're working with a young person, you're sort of asking them, what kind of person would you like to be? What kind of life would you like to have? Who do you admire? Oh, what are they like? What's their life like? With the person towards the end of the life, can you ask those kinds of questions? Um, like, are there any other older people you know? And what are their lives like? And what do you admire that you admire? What do you admire about them? What do you wish that you might have like them? Is that a direction you could possibly go in?
Sounds reasonable. It's not future oriented in terms of their own development, but it could be future oriented in terms of legacy, how people remember you.
Or it's future oriented in the sense that they're still alive and they can. So, I mean, I know questions you might ask any person are, um, what would make your current life ideal? Just, if you were having a dream session. Why don't you take it, Zach? What kinds of things that you employ either with kids or, mature people do you see are usable in this situation? And maybe we'll also see which ones are problematic or less likely to be helpful.
Hmm. I work collaboratively with kids. I have done this since I was 18 years old working with kids. If you get information from students, kids, people about what's making something, first, if you agree on there's some kind of problem somewhere. Okay, two parties can agree to there's a problem, even if the reasons for the problem are different.
Now,
And
let me just stop there. So, conceivably, that would be a trickier deal with. I'm making this person to be 67 with a 67-year-old who's thinking about the end of her life,
well, it
or
could be.
no?
Let's see how you think. If I Let me see if I can take it the whole way and see if you think so, because I wonder that too. So with kids and there's two people, you can do this. It's like I have a problem. Here's why. The student says, yes, that is a problem, but here's why it's a problem for me. Here's why it's difficult. And you can extract out why something's difficult for the kid, why something's difficult for the adult, and then we can lay out parameters. Well, here's the thing. It sounds like this is hard for you. My bottom line is I really need this to happen. Is there a creative way we can make it happen together? It doesn't have to be the normal way we've been doing it. And that is usually helpful. Funny for a kid, even though the adult is thinking about them developing into an older, more mature person. Usually, the kids I work with are thinking in the here and now. Like, I want to come tomorrow and this feels better. So that can kind of compare. In
That's
this
funny.
situation, I think you were saying, like, w would the older person in the scenario, would the mom in the situation, would she actually agree that there's something that's a problem? Um, so my suggestion with some trepidation was I reflected for this person that it sounds like there is a problem for sure. And he's kind of saying, I want to just be there and love my mother, but it's too exhausting to do all the time. So I'm sort of naturally, unilaterally setting boundaries. And a lot of the boundaries that are being set by this person and their family members around the person's mother are kind of the tone of the boundary is, here it goes again, or she's calling at 3 in the morning again. God, that's mom, isn't it? And so my suggestion was rather than ugh, maybe it's worth addressing behaviors that this person is doing and letting her know that when this happens, it makes me feel this way, and I'm going to stop answering your texts or calls. It might already be what you're doing, but maybe putting it out there allows this person to hear that there is a problem, and maybe you don't have to actually invoke alcohol as being part of the problem at all. So if it's I get a lot of texts from you at 3 in the morning. I'm sleeping at 3 in the morning. Actually, everyone in the family's sleeping at 3 in the morning. If you do text then or call me then, I'm not going to answer it, but I love you and I'll talk to you the next day. Uh, that is something that could be brought to a person's awareness that isn't so heavy that they have trouble rethinking about it or have to reduce dissonance. It also doesn't make this person feel like they're in isolation. I think that sometimes when you have such a big problem, and you know it's kind of a problem, you start being suspicious that everyone around you is always noticing the problem. When are they noticing and when are they not? So being brought to the mother's attention, it could be actually helpful in knowing, well, there's a time that it's an issue. I think those kinds of changes could be made. It's interesting how you could be somebody with such a destructive issue and you could be drinking and inebriated all the time, but and people are still listening and they still understand things and
Do
this
you
is
feel she's inebriated all the time? Is that the word back that you're getting from it?
I don't it's enough of the time that it's at least enough of the time that it's either unpredictable or it's super predictable that she'll always be. I can't I don't know quite. Either way, that seems like a way to go. Like bring up an issue that's not huge, but something that if you're already setting a boundary and not talking about it, maybe talking about it is the way to go. And
Well,
maybe
talking
talking,
about it and linking a behavior to it.
right, and linking a response to it and just being totally above board, just that metacognition without actually bringing up the alcohol problem.
Three models jump into my mind.
Mm,
The first model is the community reinforcement family therapy,
mm,
where what you do is you say to the person, um, you're doing X or Y, no more of that. And then you steer them into therapy. We've always had problem with the steering them into therapy part, but you could set the boundary and say, I'm not going to talk to you anymore if you do X. You're saying, well, I'm not going to talk to you at 3 in the morning. So that's a boundary. Would you think about saying, Mom, I'm not going to talk to you when you're inebriated? Is that a possible add on to that boundary?
it's possible. Now, this is where I'm a little bit fuzzy. I This is my what I would do. I don't think I would even do that.
Why is that?
Maybe.
Tell me why
Uh,
not.
because I think because you're inebriated add-on is so huge in that person's life. I mean, that person has to know that they're being destructive and probably has a built-in mechanism like not to think about it if they can. So the problems aren't alcohol per se, even though they seem to be leading to problems. Like you could imagine this woman drinking and being social and okay. I think it might be more beneficial to work backwards at these are the things that are happening after you're drinking, and
And then she
there's
might make the
specific.
connection herself.
Right, that's how I'm thinking about it. I don't know. It depends who's
There,
coming to me asking for advice,
right. Obviously, we're making a person up. I mean, there's a third model. I'll skip the middle model for 1 second. The third model is a hospice, and we've all heard stories of my mother. We don't know what kind of health this person is in. Um, my mother, has terminal cancer, and she goes to a hospice, and they administer, painkillers as appropriate because, we're not worried about negative drug use. We're worried about her comfort towards the end of her life. So that's a third model where if you're thinking, my mother is either ill or, in all honesty, she doesn't have many options in front of her besides drinking. Um, it's not for me to deprive her of this sustenance. How do you react to that kind of logic?
I think that works. Am I wrong to think hospice is sort of, I mean, that's when you're really nearing end of life, right? Is that what
Right.
you're thinking?
She's not hospice.
Right.
She's
So
not
what
as bad as a hospice. I don't. You made it sound like her life's fairly limited, though, and possibly is there illness in it? I don't know.
Yeah, I think in this situation that there is illness in it. Yeah. So I just want to know, are you meaning um you can do what you can for now and it's not crazy to think that when they're getting act really end of life care that that person could be made comfortable and that would be a setting in which that
And
they
people
actually.
welcome that. They gush is too strong a word, but they say, I'm happy my mother is getting sufficient opioids that she's not feeling pain.
I
Yeah.
think for now this person is living in a situation where it's a normal day-to-day life in home. And it's having an effect on her spouse, and it's having an effect on
Oh, she
her
has a
kid.
spouse.
She d
Okay.
That was part of it too. Is now how can I care for my father who doesn't? He's not going to ask for help, and reasonably so. What do you even ask for? And I don't want to overimpose, but what do I do to help him? It's like it's a person who realizes that maybe my mother will never change, but I still want to love my mother, and I don't want to exhaust myself, and I want to limit the frustration so that when I'm with them, everything's good.
I somehow made up the idea that the mother was single and it was him and his siblings maybe who was dealing with her because that kind of thing comes up all the time. So I'll tell there's another person in there, and part of you was wondering, well, how are they? When you deal with a child, you're wondering how the family members are reacting and how can they react in a more constructive way. That's always something you're dealing with. An unusual case I had was a daughter, and she had a sister and a mother, were coming to me because their father was falling for one of those things where you send tons of money to Nigeria.
Mm, mm.
And this is a very smart, educated family. They conceived of that in addiction like terms. And they brought him to speak with me. And so, in a situation like that, a very logical question is to say to and he didn't have dementia. He was a functioning professional. He wasn't fully, he actually had an area of expertise and he only was teaching part time. So naturally, you're thinking, well, he's not feeling totally fulfilled. But one area to pursue is right away. Why do you think your daughter and your wife brought you here? I mean, what's going on? I mean, it's a smart man. And then he'll tell his story. And, he has some kind of story. And then, you could explore that and say, are you, and part of his story is he wants to build up money to leave to his daughters. That's part of his story, and his wife,
Mm,
if he dies. And I say, see, you want to make your children, your family members happy. And then naturally you go, are your family members happy right now? And try to draw the most obvious connection with an intelligent, logical man to have him feel the feedback which your friend is saying, or not your friend, the person you're talking about is feeling. He feels it. He feels it from her, his father, and from his siblings or cousins.
mm.
How do you put those things together? When you have a child and you perceive the child's acting out, like, I'll make something up. We don't have a case. The kid's not trying hard and they're flunking, and you perceive that the parents are placing demands on the child that are beyond his capabilities or he doesn't
Mm,
feel good about.
mm.
So you come into this situation. Well, I mean, you're in a school, you were brought in because of the kids' behavior, but you immediately perceive that dynamic. How do you go from there?
I think I see what you're saying. There's something that right in the case you brought up just now, there's something that people are unaware of about the kid and what they are interested in and what makes them tick and why they're doing things they're doing. So giving that child an ability to articulate themselves actually helps not just other people understand, but perhaps them understand themselves better, which you could map on to this other experience. And so, is there a way to either be the liaison or to actually help this person articulate things that are important to them so that people, is that what you mean? But so that people better
Yeah.
understand and they
Or
may be
there's a
better at it.
third way that you didn't mention, so maybe you wouldn't use it. You could go directly to parents and say, do you have any feeling for why, Billy is kind of,
Mm,
he's not dumb. Do you have any, why would you say he's not making an effort? You could try and make them more self-aware.
right,
Is,
right, right. So but it's, in this case, the man bringing it up to his father.
well, that's
So those are the
one
mother.
logical thing.
Is
Yeah.
that what you mean? Um, that I'm actually remembering this is just a friend of mine who had I think I don't know 90 something year old father, and this there was no intervention here, but he wanted his father to tell his story. And so came over with a tape recorder all the time and said, "Well, okay, so tell me where you were." The person was sort of falling into dementia, but he could remember these dates and times and started recording. And the father was always drunk. This father in this case was always drunk. So he listened back to his own tape and realized that he sounded like an idiot while he was saying it and wanted to do it again. And so that was I'm not suggesting that everybody go with a tape recorder to their alcoholic mother, but I am
That is
saying
a behavioral technique that
that
people use.
that it's like tell me about you and what's what your life is.
How
Yeah.
would you imagine? Again, we're blowing in the wind here. How would you imagine? Let's imagine that the father is kind of a meek and passive person
Mm.
and is unwilling or unable to express his feelings about his wife's behavior. Is there any way, or how would you go about making him more expressive to his wife? It might be changing a whole dynamic that they've had for a long time.
Well, now I'm thinking back to where to working with kids. I don't mean to blow in the wind, I just am. But I have a concept called All About Me. People get to tell stories about themselves and who they are, and sort of like our life story in our life process program, where people write stories about themselves from the beginning. My prologue, my here and now, my future, and I have kids tell stories about their families if they want to, or hobbies they're interested in. And sometimes, if they get really good at it, there's a social skill of just becoming interested and seeing what's interesting about other people around you, sometimes I'll have kids interview other kids about their stories, which helps them create an all about me, about them. And so I operate always in stories. If someone's having a lot of trouble in the here and now, I'm always curious, why do you even care about this person? You know, what there's why are you putting up with such behavior rather than doing something else? And if there's a soft way to ask that question, like, will you tell me about when you got married? Will you tell me about the life you've built? That sometimes gets into it. That's not direct at all to the problem, but it is a way of considering what is it about this person. Because I do wonder if, sometimes if somebody's so destructive, you forget who they are.
So you might say to this person, if they were your client, you might explore, well, how's your dad feel about all this? And what's your dad like? Let's just talk about him for a minute. And some techniques you might employ are to say, the two that we've mentioned is you might say, Mom, I'd really like to know, you're getting older, and I was always curious a little bit, about how you two met and your marriage before me and what your children and what marriage was like with us children, us little brats running around. Do you think we could sit down and maybe get Dad to talk a little bit about that?
Right,
That would be sort of like and the mother is then cast in a role of listening to the father. And sometimes in a situation like that, you're thinking, well, the father's going to express things about the mother that she's avoided hearing.
right.
Or I'm going back to your very first example. If you really wanted to be circuitous, you might say, Mom, Dad's getting older. There's an awful lot I don't know about him.
Mm.
Maybe he was in the service or, whatever his job was. Do you think I could come by one day, with a tape recorder and just ask him about his life, just to learn more about him? So you could, those two techniques, um, you know, the guy who interviewed his father and his father became aware how intoxicated he sounded that way. Or in the other scope, the mother would become more aware of the impact she's having on her husband, which presumably she still cares about.
Now,
That,
do you have any? So there's this being upfront about things that are problems, but making them the kinds of problems that a person could respond to, rather than think, well, that's ridiculous. I'm going to isolate myself.
but the
Uh,
other technique that we use in LPP is, well, let's not talk about addiction.
right,
Let's just talk about your life.
exactly. Now, do you have a sense that there are people, places out there who lend support for someone in this situation? Do you have a sense that there needs to be someone out there who people, places, professionally that lend support?
Well, there's this whole new kind of helper. What are they called? There's a word for it. I'm bad on vocabulary. They call them what, doyens or something, like where you talk with, where you help older people through the end of your life. What's the name
Hmm,
of that?
I'm not sure.
There's a professional that does that. Um, and I always imagine them working with a single elderly person, but they are a professional whose job it is to, just extract information and listen. Their job is listening totally. Because the person they're usually dealing with is then towards the end of their life. You're not looking for giant behavioral change. And so you might look in the phone book for that kind of person, except since I haven't given the name of the profession.
Hmm.
But, you might look, if you were searching end of life help, end of life psychology, you'd come up with that kind of a person. And then you might say, well, why don't you have somebody like that come by? They're used to dealing with older people. They're used to extracting information non-judgmentally. They're used to making people feel comfortable in their situations, and just for the person to kind of explore their space and come to grips with it in a peaceful way. So
So
they're like,
that's like a creative, let's talk about life way of dealing with things. Is there a, do you imagine that there's a parallel to LPP thing that's like Al-Anon? You know, for the family member who is struggling to make heads or tails or just live constructively with someone who's being destructive and who doesn't want it to be indoctrinated or talk to people about their war stories. Um, I don't know. I don't have any
are you
advice.
focusing? Who are you focusing on when
I'm focusing on the man who came to me with the problem.
ah?
And that was his biggest question is I think if I just had someone else who I thought was thoughtful to talk to about this more often, and maybe who has experienced something like it, then I'd probably be okay. Or if there's
So
a
you're looking at him as the client needing help,
I see him as the first person in this situation who said there's a problem here. Yeah. So
and
the client,
I'm not happy. And so you work with him, and I mean, the first thing you would say to him already is to explore those boundary settings. That's the standard thing, you know. Did he come up with that? Don't call me 3 in the morning, or did you came up with that?
he mentioned that there was it gave me examples of some behavior that's happening, and that was just like on a as part of a list of, and then there's the calling at 3 in the morning, and then we don't answer anymore, and that's when I was thinking,
So he's
well,
already doing that.
exactly. So he's doing it, but hasn't actually said, "Hey, you call me at 3 in the morning, and when you do it, I'm not going to answer." You know what I mean? But
But
my
she
thinking
must
is
notice that he's not answering anymore.
precisely. Then that's why I think it's actually valuable to put that into words, so that now I know, and you know, and we know that we each know that this is something that you're doing, and that's an issue, and I'm setting a boundary,
So
and
the way you're
that I love you.
pursuing that is to say, well, you're already setting boundaries.
Right.
Why are you setting boundaries? Are they helpful to you? Do you think your mother's picking up on this at all? Could you take it a step further in terms of the boundary setting and get your mother or your mother and father involved?
Right.
You know, you might do that couple thing where you say, Mom, have you noticed I haven't been, or Dad, have you noticed for Mom that I haven't been picking up the phone or text at 3 in the morning? Bring that out into the open so that she knows the boundary. There's She probably already understands the boundary, but it's made explicit.
There's this person has adult children, and the adult children have gone to the mother's house before, and or their grandmother's house before, and her way of socializing with them at this point is saying, "Let's have some wine or have some." And at first they conceded, "Okay, let's do that since that's the way we can spend time with you." But it never turned out great. So the adult kid's boundary is, "Well, I'm just not going over there anymore, 'cause she's going to make us drink." So then this guy is thinking, "Well, how can I help my kids also set similar boundaries?" So I could imagine there being some conversations from everybody and some boundary setting. I also imagine that maybe the conversation never gets into you're drinking too much, what the hell? But it could, you know, if you it opens the door to those. It's those are possible boundaries to set where the conversation doesn't get too wild, and it could open the door into further
Well, in
discussion
the
about
life
them.
process program, we are the helper. I mean, as I often say, we're the therapy program for people that don't like therapy programs. So we're not saying, oh, go to AA. They're
Right.
talking to us. And we start with the behavior or the unhappiness. We start out by saying, um, like to the kids, well, you're not enjoying visiting your grandmother, and you might say to the grandmother, "Oh, the you notice the grandkids don't come over anymore or much anymore." And when you're talking to the grandkids, you might say, "Would you be more likely to come over if when your grandmother said, 'Well, let's have some wine,' you said, 'No, thank you.'" And then you could say to the grandmother, "Mom, why have you noticed kids don't visit much anymore? Why do you
Hmm.
think that is?" And in LP people, we always work backwards from the behavior to the quote addiction. It's not our business to decide whether the person's addicted, but if they make the connect, I mean, then at some point in his mother's mind, it can be, oh, if I want the grandkids to visit, which I love, then I can't drink while they're around. Okay, which do I love more? And, at least it's right there on the platter in front of her.
I might even wonder if there's a conversation with the adult children that what is it that grandma does when she's drinking that you don't like, and have them work on it. Well, it's the yelling, or it's the she repeats things 40 times, or she falls asleep in the middle. I don't know what it is, and so maybe there's a way to say for them to say, I'm going to come over and I'm going to leave when this behavior happens, or I don't know.
Well, one of the things that yeah, I mean, one of the things that we do is one of our exercises is called like how to make you into a therapist. And we work in an exercise with the client for them to deal with somebody else in a helpful way
Hmm.
by learning to use kind of motivational techniques so that the kids could develop, not saying, "Grandma, you drink too much." "Grandma, we haven't been coming over much lately. It bothers us that we don't. I don't know. Do you know why we don't? Or what is it that makes us uncomfortable?" And in some indirect way, present the issues for the mother to be able to just contemplate. No. What we're talking about is your friend has asked you, "My mother drinks too much. I'm worried about it. Should I go to Al-Anon?" Our gut reaction is no. We're not the people you come to get recommendations for Al-Anon. He's asked you, are there any kind of professionals who might be good at helping out in a situation like this? And we've recommended the possibility of talking to people that deal with older people with end of life type issues in a gentle and understanding, non accusatory way. And then we've described how we work with people through the life process program and with family members, including in families with children, to try and increase the understanding, have people set boundaries, but set boundaries that communicate to the person whose behavior might want to change, or maybe is the most needing of change.
And we've discussed allowing the very people that you're worried about to be able to sort of open up to you in a different way that might inspire their own best thinking about what's important to them. Like, can you tell me a little bit about your how this family got started, how you met dad, what was important about us as kids, what's important to you in life? That's people usually welcome that.
It's a way of eliciting their values, um, and helping them be more aware of their situation, which is a technique that underlies your work in general. I mean, you don't want to make. You're not a guy who makes a list. "Oh, I'll do all my homework, from 8 to 10 every night." That's not where you want to end up. That's not what you get. There are people that there are study programs all over the place that give out lists like that. But we're talking about an interpersonal, motivational technique of approaching a problem, including a nexus of people.
So there really isn't a good, because that's all so that can all be so specific. I don't think either one of us can recommend an Al-Anon like place that would say things to you like that. I mean, we have community reinforcement approach, which they have a book called Beyond Addiction. Um, we do have the Life Process Program does have a Facebook group where people do discuss issues like this. So that's a place people can go. We don't have a program dedicated to it, not to say that we never could or will, but it's
Well,
more like,
there are a ton of groups about what do I do about my elderly mother, senile mother. That's a
mm.
thing I see constantly. I know people in situations like that. So dealing with, to use the word, impaired parent, there are a ton of groups like that.
So
And perhaps,
if you have the wherewithal to know that addiction is, one kind of experience that could cause distress among other ways people could be causing distress in their lives or other people's lives, and you could see that as parallel, then really be joining up with any group of people who talk about what do I do with my mom who is whatever it is. Um,
well,
that
if you
that could
join
be
a group
helpful.
like that, especially on the internet, you're allowed to say, my mom drinks too much, or I worry about it. First of all, probably there'll be a bunch of people who have a similar experience.
Yeah.
And second of all, if they say, oh, we don't deal with that in this group, we only deal with dementia, you can say, well, maybe I better look for another group.
Well, I'll do more thinking about this too because this is something that kept me up late at night, and I wish that overnight I could sort of write the material that helps people in every situation. This has been helpful to talk through it with you, Stanton.
Pleasure's been mine, Zach. We'll keep well working on it. Bye now.